home, I'll go ahead and get us started here at our last stop, and short but sweet. But you know, we also made pretty profound statements about the effect of irrigation application rate, distance of fecal pad back, age of fecal pad, and how that can reduce or increase microbes and nutrients and other things coming off irrigated pasture. And so I think by now you ought to have a sense of this is a multi-scale group. And so we have a lot of plot scale studies that we use so we can really get control of various treatments that are potential management practices. And that's what this is for irrigated pasture, much as the RDM plots were for annual rangeland. We have the watershed scale up, like Schubert, for the rangeland side. What we have to scale up here are, about 20 irrigated pastures. That's an irrigated pasture on that hill slope. It's an irrigated pasture here that we can monitor the flow coming off of those fields and try to implement management there at the field scale that we found to be successful here at the experiment scale. And so we're able to kind of confirm these results, and we're consistently finding the results I was talking about at both scales. The way this works is there's 18 plots here, and they're planted with basically the same irrigated pasture mix that we plant out through here. I think it's UC Davis's recommended mix. It's a mix of clover and orchard grass. We try not to put too much orchard grass because it gets bumpy or clumpy, but perennial ryegrass and some other things. And so these are, introduced plants. These are bounded by aluminum sheeting, buried about a foot in the ground to try and isolate them. We can apply water at the top here and distribute it, like we've got a little baby irrigated pasture, at whatever rate we want. So that's how we study irrigation rate. We get flow, and they're different lengths, so we could, in this one, as a control, put the fecal pad right here and have an equal contributing area, pasture area above, say, a buffer. This one is 2 meters, so we can put the fecal pad back this far, have an equal contributing area, but yet have an additional area of buffer below it to try and make sure we have equal source conditions above. And so there's an endless number of permutations of things that we could study here. So we've invested in this infrastructure. There's a lot of learning from what we did there and how to build these things and how to make them work and how to run these experiments. And this is getting pretty good. This is probably about as good as you can get and not spend a truly insane amount of money, in developing this kind of infrastructure. And so, and this is also, when we're looking at the pathogens, we can't willy-nilly put pathogens out across the landscape. We've got to be relatively careful about where we put them. And so these kinds of controlled experiments allow us to look at pathogens, and we think we'll be looking at pharmaceutical products. USDA and their funding is going from microbial to pharmaceutical for the next 4 to 5 years. So, antibiotics that are given to cattle and the byproducts that come out in feces and urine. If you're doing any kind of anabolic steroids to promote growth in beef cattle, any of those byproducts that come out, there's a lot of concern about those products coming out, getting into streams and messing with the reproductive, scheme of amphibians and fish. And so we're working with Art, and that's Art's area of Art is actually a veterinarian himself and has worked his whole career on looking at registering a lot of these types of products. And so we'll probably respond to that call this spring and start transitioning into some of these other, pending constituents of concern. Because I think we've pretty much, for the purposes of directing management on these landscapes, we've pretty well probably found out what we need to know about microbes and DOC and these things. It's time to move on to some new constituents. And so, this is the kind of infrastructure that we use. And then the nice thing about this station is we compare it with the field scale application and see if what works here works there. And one of the things that we've not done very well, and I think a lot of people haven't done very well, and the next logical step in all of these BMP implementations is keeping track of the economics. What's the cost to a rancher of a 10 or of a 50% reduction in E. coli, or a 50% reduction in DO, DOC. What's the cost of that so that they understand it? We've got to offset that with possible production benefits that might come from some of these management practices. But we're talking about selling carbon credits in the future on rangeland and pasture. In some places that's already happening. And so, really trying to get into the economics of these BMPs and connect that final gap to the agricultural business side of what we've been talking about today. And so, basically water comes on, water comes off. We can measure the volume of water coming off. And again, back to the idea that there's no replicates. The plots down there, they're all identical other than size in terms of their creation. From there to here, we have an immense gradient in runoff. Those plots will run off very well. They all get irrigated at the same time, same rate. We'll get an hour to 2 hours lag before we have runoff down here. So just as Toby was talking, these really dynamic soils that exist here and their capacity to intake water. And so high risk of runoff right down there and transport. It's almost difficult on this long plot. It's almost impossible to get runoff down here. So a lot of variation. With that, if there are any questions in general about the workshop or about these particular sites, yeah.
Did you look at vertical migration of nutrients under the?
No, didn't know Toby at that time. One of the things we'd like to do in this new grant, we're going to put some. We're going to write to the fall. If we get funded, one of the things that's going to be in the budget will be instrumentation to look at soil moisture dynamics down through here, as well as also to be able to look at what's being lost in soil solution and what's going subsurface. And at the trench plot, which we can't get to on rangeland, where he's actually opened the face and is capturing all the runoff, that's the ideal situation where you can truly get it. Here we'll have to do it a little bit more by hook and by crook, just doing water balance. And Toby, you feel free to speak up if I'm mangling the soil moisture discussion. Yeah. And the other thing, so I get a lot of questions about using native species. And what about using native grasses, native forbs? A lot of people are interested in planting those and restoring those, rather than having wetlands that are whatever grows there. Particularly here, can we, outside of, as Toby very appropriately pointed out, there's a lot of problems with establishing natives in some of these systems because of the alien seed input. But if we can get them established, do we see the same level of trapping efficiency that we see with these good old-fashioned pasture grasses? And nutrient cycling and so on and so forth. Sequestration of carbon, that type of thing. So it's very easy to change the plant community here if that's what we decide to do. Yes?
Have you actually implemented, or has anyone in the state implemented the BMPs on a working ranch?
Yeah, certainly. So part of our connectivity with the university through cooperative extension out to the county-based advisors is, yes, I think what I see in working with ranchers, and I do a lot of on-ranch visits, the farm advisors do even more, is if you get invited out and you visit with them and you see some problems, you lay out some options. Generally, one or two of those will get picked up, and most of those are the proactive group, in the industry. So there's definitely implementation of some of these practices. The least popular is the fixed buffer fence the bottom of the pasture. That's really not popular for a lot of reasons. The wetland, in my experience working with folks, the wetland idea is more popular than that. One of the genuine concerns that's voiced by landowners that I work with is if I build a wetland that I didn't have before, you guys have heard this, all of a sudden I'm subject to all these rules. What if I get one of those? It's like getting a disease. What if I get one of those endangered species? What if they come and live there? And that's sad. That's the exact wrong message we want to be sending to these folks, but it's a real concern. And so if you can get past that, I see it. I see a lot of riparian pastures being put in, not to fence the creek and ignore it, but to fence back a ways and then be able to use it strategically. And it really depends upon what issues people are facing. If you're in the East Bay and are being looked at really hard by a lot of the drinking water districts, you're a bit more motivated. If you're in the Salinas Valley right now, you're a bit more motivated. Certain parts of the state, people aren't very motivated. So it really depends upon what the pressures are. Yeah. So, what's hard to do at the ranch scale is demonstrate effectiveness.
Right.
That's the hard part. So hopefully there's enough science, that we don't know the exact effectiveness of a rancher doing X, but we know it's 50 to 90, say, if they implement it the way we recommend and manage it the way we recommend. And so that's probably good enough, at least from my perspective, because I think we've got to get on to the next person then who's not doing anything and help them do something. Other questions?
In the timber industry, there's a certification for growing timber in ecologically sustainable ways.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a certification like that for these livestock
Yeah.
operations, where if they implement a certain amount of these things, they get some sort of a certification?
Can anybody speak to that better than I? She's asking, will there be any certification for environmentally friendly, if I will, livestock production? And is there a certification process in place, or potentially one coming along? My thinking on that is, if it can translate to a better price per pound of beef at selling, that would motivate people to do that. Part of the issue would be, who's the third-party certification? Who makes sure that what they say is happening is really happening, and it has to be comfortable for the landowner, and it has to be comfortable for whomever's paying the premium. But there is a premium for natural beef, and so a lot of growers that we work with don't implant with growth hormones anymore. A lot of them do, but a lot of them don't, because they get a markup for natural beef. And so, it can be market driven. And I think landowners would, the ones that are willing to, that would respond to that.
There are organic rules.
Yeah.
And there's an interim rule on pasture fed or grass fed, but that's mainly language. It's 2007 when it first, it's not been finalized.
Yeah.
But the organic has a environmental component. Sure. And that is third party verified. Yeah. But there isn't anything exact like the forest, exactly like you asked in the forest industry that we have.
But maybe someday, if the market will bear that, we'll move towards it.
Certainly we have growers that are doing organic, grass-fed, as they've said, and that's all market-driven. They think the consumer's going to pay them additional money, and so it's got to work out on the other end. It was going great until this little economic downturn.
That's the other thing, now we're going into a bad time to add value.
The rest of that answer, though, USDA does have a program, though, that you can make up anything you want and make it auditable, and they'll certify it, and so you can use that as marketing in their particular VCP program.
Will anybody pay for that?
What's that?
Will any of the buyers pay for that? Or
that's up to whoever puts that together to try to market it. That's up to them.
Wineries are going that way.
Yeah. One of the things, for ranchers, individual ranchers, in terms of compliance with whatever, a TMDL or irrigated lands program or something else, it often boils down to compliance is some kind of a ranch water quality plan. Identifying your problems, prioritizing them, identifying fixes, putting that down on paper, and you can get them through that process if they're motivated, and again, depending on driving forces, they're motivated. It always comes down to, though, where does that plan go? Who holds it? Is it subject to FOIA? And what is the on-farm audit process? So very similar. This issue keeps coming up time and time again. And from my perspective as a scientist and an educator, that's for the industry and the regulatory community to work out. We can help them build the plan. We can make sure the content is good. We can make sure the science that there is good. But, all this stuff is, I think we see this in the Irrigated Lands program and every other one I've been involved with, comes right down to the point of, at what point do we know that we have compliance and can move on to the next ranch or the next issue? And I've never seen that resolved very well in California.
I think there are some programs, though, that will evolve,
because we work primarily with dairies, but they have the dairy quality assurance program, you know, which is not only a reduction in your regulatory fees, but it's, you know, a certification. And I worked a lot in beef. There was a beef quality assurance which said that at least for your livestock practices you followed certain guidelines, so there was a certification. So I don't think it's too far-fetched that
No, not at all.
there would be some sort of stewardship, you know, certification.
I think it'd be ideal if we could come up with something that has a very similar format, because some ranchers are dealing with endangered species, some are dealing with water quality, some are dealing with other issues, and it'd be great if on rangelands and this type of landscape we could get something that would have utility across all those uses, because it's hard enough to get folks to write a plan. It's hard enough to get me to write a final report for a contract, right? If they don't hold that 10% back, I won't write it. It's just fine. And so, you know, it's just the reality is to get people to do that stuff, you know, there's got to be some motivation and some benefit. And I think the dairy quality assurance program is a good example. My understanding is, I'm not sure of this, but I think in air quality, in some of the confined animal facilities, that's coming along as well.
Yeah.
So there's some models there to look at.
What are the cages for?
Damn turkeys. Wild turkeys are thick.
Yep.
And they come in here, so we got our fecal pat.
I had to do it.
We got our fecal pat. It's from this, it had who knows what in it, something bad. It's right there, it's dosed, it's aging, right? It's got to be 7 days old before we irrigate. Sits here, the turkeys come out at night, they peck and they chew and eat at it. The only thing I can hope is they get salmonella, because they ruined my experiment, because I don't know what's left anymore. I know the turkey took some away and I got some left. And so Donna, who's here, takes care of this plot. They just bring these down and put them over them until we irrigate to keep the turkey out. And I just noticed, and several other people did, we got a real bear problem down here now, because they're coming down eating these olives, and a lot of bears. So hopefully they don't tear this up. Well, otherwise, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your time and your interest in this. And remember, the presentations will be online at the Field Station website. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Follow up. If you want, you can get a card from me. Otherwise, just kwtate@ucdavis.edu. We'll do it. All right. So we'll head back to the headquarters.